For those of you who don't know what an NPPF is and why it should matter to you, well, this is the video for you. We're going to have an expert planning consultant, been a planning consultant for 30 plus years, and he's going to explain these things to us. This is a new piece of legislation that is going out to, so it's pre-consultation, but there are some big changes. Bear in mind, the last change was only December 2023. So what is an NPPF? Why does it matter to you? And spoiler alert, it's not as bad as you may think. So if you're a developer or want to be a developer, or you're worried about housing and how we're going to solve homelessness and things like that, this is an important listen for you, because it's going to give you some real insight into how these things work and what changes the Labour government are bringing in. So let's get well with it.
Okay, welcome everyone to Property Auction Hunters. Today we have a special guest discussing with us breaking news about the proposed changes in the National Planning Policy Framework proposed by the government. And those changes will affect a lot of property investors. They will affect a lot of developers potentially. And we want to discuss what are those proposed changes and what can we expect as traders, property auction people from those changes, and how can we get involved, because actually those proposed changes are in the consultancy phase, so people can't get involved. And yeah, David Kemp will tell us all about those changes. So welcome, David, to our chat.
Hi guys. Hi. Good to see you, mate.
Yes, obviously you're quite experienced in planning and planning law, and you're a lawyer by trade, right?
I started as a chartered surveyor, so it's been
Yeah, and you've been a planning consultant for how long?
30 years, I think, nearly 30 years.
30 years. Okay, yeah. So clearly you've gone through like a few governments and a few planning policy frameworks.
Just a few, yes, yeah.
Yeah, can you tell us like what is a national planning policy framework and how is it relevant to property developers and property investors?
Yeah, so National Planning Policy Framework is sort of the rules or the guidance that applies on planning applications, not permitted developments. Generally speaking, not permitted development, there are some exceptions, but generally speaking, if you're putting in a plan application for planning permission or listed building consent anywhere across the country, these are sort of, if you like, your centre line, your plumb line in terms of what you should generally expect your local authority to be applying at their local level. But of course, each local authority can sort of wander off from that plumb line if they like, and adjust for local circumstances and local evidence. So they don't necessarily have to follow what the government's national policy position is, and of course they'll have to justify that through local planning inquiries at their own local level. But the national planning policy framework basically is encapsulating what the government thinks is the right planning direction on a variety of subjects, and the document itself, the national planning policy framework, is split into a number of different sections which deal with housing. It deals with coastal change, flood risk, listed buildings, heritage conservation areas, green belt, countryside development, all sorts of things as well. So it's quite wide ranging, and then it's backed up by what's called the planning policy guidance behind it. So you've got the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF, then you've got planning policy guidance, which is also applied at the national level, that sits just behind that as well.
Okay, and how selective can local councils be in applying those guidelines from the national policy framework? Can they totally
really good question.
Disregard it? Where is the line which basically you can hold the council accountable to those things, or can they just argue things away?
Yeah, well, they shouldn't be disregarding it. They should always have regard to it. They could disapply it. So, obviously, not to split hairs on the language, because obviously there's a difference between having regard to something and they deciding to set it aside. And so they do have to have regard to it. But as I said, if they have local circumstances which justify a slightly different approach, then they can follow that approach. A common example is with affordable housing policy, for instance. So the national threshold for affordable housing policy says that you don't have to provide any affordable housing or any financial contribution towards affordable housing if your proposal is for up to 9 dwellings, up to 9 new dwellings. So once you get to the 10th dwelling, if you're proposing development for 9 dwellings, no affordable housing contribution there. If you're providing that proposal for 10, 11, 12 plus dwellings, then you'll trigger the need for an affordable housing contribution. We see a lot of local authorities, particularly around London, and some metropolitan areas outside London might be, say, in some places like Birmingham or Manchester, for instance, where they have a particularly acute housing shortage, particularly for affordable housing relative to local incomes, and they therefore will have a policy where they can say, well, we're going to have a different approach to affordable housing. We'll ask for financial contributions on loan 10. So you might be proposing 5 new homes, for instance, and they'll look for financial contribution. That's not unlawful. They're not disregarding the NPPF. They're having regard to it, but they're setting it aside because they presented evidence to the local planning inspector to say, well, we're taking a different approach here because we've got evidence which points and justifies us taking a different approach. Mm-hmm. So that's why it can be very, very frustrating for developers because it can be very, very uneven wherever you are in the country, and it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And likewise, because to a certain extent, the National Plan Policy framework is relevant to PD conversions, or commercial to residential, for instance, then you can't take a one-size-fits-all approach to permitted developments either. The framework's the same nationally. How it's applied on the ground, case by case, you can't take a one-size-fits-all approach to it. You still have to do the homework of knowing what the council's own policies and their NPPF says.
Okay, so those proposed changes in the national policy framework, do you think those are positive for developers, or they are kind of like ambiguous or maybe negative? How would you assess them?
All policies are a bit ambiguous, and quite frankly, it feels as if it's written by Sir Humphrey from Yes Minister most of the time. So there's almost a completely different language in the civil service. I have to say that comparing it to what the Conservatives did, and they kept on changing national plan and policy every 5 minutes, quite frankly. And there was a new edition in 2019 and 2021, and another one in 2023. What they did in December 2023 was they made local authorities less accountable on housing targets. They put in all sorts of caveats about building air rights up on top of existing buildings. And they looked as if, when you read through the policy, it looked as if, they'll all give with one hand and they'll all take it away. And then on the one hand, have a paragraph that developers would be glowing about and say, well, wonderful, this is an opportunity for development. And there would be some sort of catch, some sort of phrase or some sort of wording somewhere else in the policy, which would detract from that. And also, they didn't want to touch Greenbelt. And the reason why they didn't want to touch the Greenbelt is because you look at, of course, the constituency map of where all their constituents are, and they were hemorrhaging constituencies, weren't they? I mean, they were losing every by-election under the sun, and it sounded last year and going into this year as well. They were protecting their political base, and they didn't want to touch the Greenbelt. And the Greenbelt, it's a ridiculous situation.
I had a little chance. Obviously, we arranged to have a chat with you today, David.
Yeah. There's great swathes of Greenbelt where and they wash over areas of built up development. It's just a bit silly. So having a look at some of the stuff that Laser are looking to change is actually quite interesting, quite exciting. And at the same time, all these rumours that they're going to take away permitted development, I don't think that's going to happen, quite frankly.
Brilliant. I mean, I had obviously we agreed that you'd come on and have a chat with us. So last night I did a little bit of a research. I started reading the the NPPF, and I thought, well, how bad can this be? Now, I'm legally trained. I can read a statute. Given half an hour's notice, I could pull out a couple of points. But this is so far outside of anything that I've done for many, many years. I mean, I used to do planning game years ago, I say 15, 16 years ago. But I got well past the introduction part of the national policy framework, planning policy framework. But I kept getting drawn back to these. It's an A through to K bullet point list of things that they're saying that they're changing in this document from the December 2023 document. And one of them that they all kind of have this kind of feel to them, but point G says, deliver affordable, well-designed homes with new golden rules, in air quotes, why not, for land released in the green belt to ensure it delivers in the public interest. So I read that one and I thought, that sounds amazing. What does it mean? But then, you see other things here.
You cut out there. So after the air quote, what would you say after that?
Oh, after the air quotes. So it's deliver affordable, well-designed homes with new golden rules for land released in the green belt to ensure it delivers in the public interest.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, there's been a few people who've been worried about this whole affordable housing 50% threshold in the green belt. But what they seem to be missing is that there's an important set of words there that says subject to financial viability. There's a whole Annex 6, whole new annex of the NPPF, which sets out rules in terms of financial viability. Quite frankly, if they didn't have that financial viability capsule, the difficulty is you'd have some of these previously developed sites where they might have contamination on the land as well. There may be clean-up costs, notwithstanding what you have to pay for that probably in the first place as well. And they might not be viable. So that then brings into question the whole issue. How is this ever going to help them achieve a 1.5 million homes target in 5 years? And, at the end of the day, everything boils down to that. They want to say that they are bigger and better and more worthy than Conservatives. They have a large enough majority that we should be looking essentially at a two-parliament administration. I know you can't always tell. For us to have an 80-seat majority, and he's backed that for more than 5 hours. It was 5 years, albeit a mixture of bad luck because of economic circumstances and what happened with Ukraine. But they didn't help themselves either, and always seem to be shooting themselves in the foot. But if Labour are not given over to quite the same degree of excess, and have a little bit more luck, well, we should be looking at a 10-year period over which they should be able to achieve what they're looking to do. But they have said that within the next 5 years, they want to achieve 1.5 million new homes. Now, you're not going to do that on permitted development alone. And you're certainly not going to achieve that through any homes delivered through these supposed new towns that they want to build as well in the first 5 years, because that's long-term planning. That's the second parliament that they're looking to do that. So they're going to need other things like the growth fund, infrastructure planning, and they're going to need grey votes. And you can see that they started this charm offensive because the starts to reinforce the need for joint working across administrative areas. It's saying all the right things to stakeholders and local authorities who say, well, what are we getting out of this? We're letting all this extra housing in our areas. It's affecting our countryside setting, all the rest of it. Whether or not they want affordable housing on their doorstep, I don't know. It's another matter, because some of them will say, well, that's going to affect our house prices as well. But they're looking to offer something back. And Ida Lorraine's been very busy in the last week. You look at the ministerial website, all the letters that she's been writing to the mayors. So they're in the honeymoon period at the moment, and they're trying to cash in and make friends and influence people to see if they can get some cooperation here. But it's very clear from the run-up to the election that there are also trying not to cock a snoot to the House Builders Federation and to business as well. And so having that annexing about financial liability makes sense because they need a get out of jail card. If they are looking to deliver these houses, they are a hostage to fortune by saying to the electorate in their manifesto, we're going to deliver 1.5 million in the next 5 years. Then they've got no chance of doing that unless they give themselves a way out of being able to say, well, yeah, normally we would look for affordable housing, 50% affordable housing, but you can trust us. We've put the developer to proof, and we've held them to that provide their prices and shaking them for every penny that we think we can get out of them in the scheme. But there's no way we're going to deliver any houses on this site or locally unless we accept a bit less. And so they need that financial viability clause. And I think at the end of the day, as a developer, you have to trust in that. You have to trust that financial viability clause. It does add an extra layer of complication, to some extent, ball ache, with trying to negotiate with local authorities on viability. But it's there, and it's still an opportunity. And then you get into the dark arts of how you negotiate that with local authorities. And that's an entirely different question. We could talk for weeks about the dark arts in terms of negotiating that with local authorities.
So a lot of what's coming out in this as well is, without reading out paragraphs and paragraphs, is there seems to be a lot of focus on design, on healthy spaces, on building things out in a environmentally friendly way, and having, whether that's building methods or location or what. So that all kind of seems like what could be. How could you have that as part of an NPPF where the delegated powers to the regions own, to the parishes and to the regions themselves, where they could really hyper focus in on, we want this kind of design, this kind of building material, has to have this amount of amenity space and blah blah blah. How does that give developers a kind of steady platform to go, right, if we were to put this forward, it has this likelihood? Or even for yourself as the consultant, how do you assess that and go, right, well, now I'm blindfolded with a dart in my hand and I could be throwing it into the eye of a horse. It could be anything.
Well, obviously you try and use programs out there, proprietary systems like what we see with Nimbus or with some of the other programs out there as well, to target particular sites. What you have to do, you have to work through effectively the sequential approach that the NPPF has set up there. So it's always brownfield first. You always look at brownfield, and you've got to bear in mind that you'll never get to the greenest of greenbelt sites unless you work through a sequential approach. So after brownfield, then you are looking at previously developed land, which is in the greenbelt, maybe of poor quality. There's already substantial development there. There are a couple of tests in relation to this within the NPPF about the kind of thing that you should look for. One of those paragraphs which defines the area of land that you should look for is there's already substantial development already on that land. And as well as that, it contributes very little in terms of protecting against urban sprawl. So one of the main reasons for the greenbelt being there was to protect against the coalescence of large towns and villages. So if you're talking about developing an area or a parcel of land, and if you do that, it's not going to make any difference in terms of urban sprawl. And that's one of the things that you'd look at. It's one of the criteria you'd look at. Now, a lot of this stuff is a little bit subjective in terms of how you apply it, but it does give you some sort of framework in order to target appropriate sites, something to assess it by, something to get hold of. And the whole design guides thing, yes, there's good things about it, and the government's pushing more and more for design guides, and that gives people more of a framework about what each council should be looking for in terms of external appearance. You're not having to second guess what officers are looking for. It's more written down, it's more prescribed, you've got a bit more certainty about it, it's a bit more codified. The difficulty does depend upon the degree of resourcing and time at local level to devote to actually drafting a design guide and putting these things together. So whether or not we see that filtered down over the next few years into actual performance at the local level, I think it comes down to the old chestnut that there's probably not enough money in the public sector at the moment. The government is looking obviously at the public sector to try to recover some lost ground there. The Bank of England obviously having cut interest rates today is probably indicating that the recent public sector pay rises, they don't think are going to lead to inflationary pressure. Question is there more money, therefore, to give to local authorities for planning services? I don't know, because apparently there's some sort of very large black hole in the public finances. Well, I think we're still in a period of flux here in terms of how this is all going to change on the ground. And I think that will remain there for some time. The government has said its approach to this would be to contribute to funding 300 additional planning posts nationwide. That wouldn't even cover planning resources that are needed in London alone, never mind nationwide. And to put in a promise like that in a manifesto as if you're somehow proud of it, this raises the question with me, well, has anybody actually read that back to themselves? Is it entwined with anybody? How ridiculous that sounds. 300 nationwide. You really haven't got the idea of the problem here, have you? Resourcing is a big issue at the local level, because one of the biggest problems that we have is whether or not we get enough time with officers. And that's where you then have to pick and choose your strategy, how you deal with them, whether or not you go for things like planning performance agreements, you use pre-apps to work out relationships as well, that sort of stuff. But at the moment, where we're talking about NPPF, this is all high-level strategic stuff, and it's great, but it needs implementation. And that's the sharp end of the planning business.
Yeah.
And like one of the things that's our kind of pet peeve in auctions are those little plots of land split into 20 million other smaller pieces of land in the middle of nowhere. Do you think they will ever get planning because of this? Do you think those people have a chance?
It's like herding traps, isn't it? It's the moment at those plots. They are hard work. I don't know about you, but I always thought that there was some sort of critical point at which you would just tend to walk away from those sites unless there was a compulsory purchase order to make it compulsory for people to actually have to sell their land and to be able to sell all their site. Because the difficulty of how you do it and who is going to be the last person you go to, you need to know that you've got a pretty easy yes with a majority of them so that you can get a viable development together before you go to the others, because the more difficult ones are going to try and hold you to ransom.
Yeah, I think that with those little plots, there's usually one owner of the whole plot. Mm-hmm. It is a little bit of a scam that they split those things in pieces and then give people a bit of a hope that they might get planning in the future for the little plot for something. And
that's what you mean.
That's the thing. And I think like people who end up buying those little plots of land have a hope that one day they will get planning, but I don't think this national planning policy will help them.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, a lot of these plots. I don't know about the ones that you're seeing, but they tend to be sort of outside of local areas. They might be within the green belt or edge of green belt as well. They're not particularly well served.
No.
So the difficulty is in being able to come forward with a scheme which offers enough gain back to the council that it's actually viable to put something there. When you compare what the NAV price is, what you've got to get back to the local authority, the cost of building it, and so on and so forth as well. From what I've seen and heard, it's easier to make money from buying these plots, buying a bigger plot, and then selling off the individual plots, because there's lots of people who just can't wait to get their hands on it. They're sold on, it's like a gold rush fever of trying to buy these little plots and thinking, yes, well, I can be a developer and I can do something with it. But the one who's making the money is the one who's selling off the plots. It's not necessarily the smaller developers. Because the economies of scale are tied up in the sale of the plots. By the time you are developing your small little plot, all the economies of scale are.
Yeah, well, all interesting to see what actually going to happen from this, those proposed changes, what's going to happen after the actual consultations, and what practical kind of changes this is going to bring at the council level, where actually things are being decided, and it will be interesting to see. But I think it's basically, we can say with a certain level of confidence that this is not groundbreaking yet. It's a promise of something, a little bit ambiguous. It might result in some positive stuff, but it doesn't have to.
Well, I think also it's interesting to see that Labour government has restored the need for a 5-year housing land supply to the local authorities.
Yeah.
And also what they've done is they've changed the rules on Greenbelt. And they said, actually, to decide whether or not you need to release greenbelt land, you need to take into account the 5-year housing land supply. If you're not building enough houses in your own area, you'll probably need to release greenbelt land. And that smacks of common sense to me. And the Conservatives had that little lacuna, that little exception in NPPF policy for years. As a political decision, and I think quite frankly they're defrauding everybody by doing that. It's a device to protect their own asses. That's all they did. There was no planning reason for it. It didn't make any logical sense. They're not building enough houses in this area, and this site is not contributing to protecting against urban sprawl, but we don't want to lose it in any event. That's a political decision all day, every day. So actually, I think a lot of what the government is doing is actually surprisingly welcome from a Labour government. Everyone's like sitting here petrified as developers, thinking, "Oh my God, we're going to get Labour, and they're going to tax us, and they're going to bring out some Mao's little red book against us, and it's going to be a Marxist economy." But actually, a lot of what they're saying, see, the economist says, but again, the sharp end is in the implementation. So as you rightly say, too early to tell. We'll have to see what kind of cooperation they draw in from the local planning authorities on the ground.
Brilliant. Okay, well, David, thanks so much for coming and chatting with us about those proposed changes. Let's see what's going to come from it. And thanks again for the appearance at Property Auction Hunters.
My pleasure. Good to see you.
First of many, hopefully.
Will do.
Cheers,
absolutely.
David.
All the best. Bye. Okay, stop.